and I joined it because at that time the Army was offering a college education for so many years in service. You were granted so many semesters of college, so I joined that in 1946, and I had my basic training in San Antonio in the Fort Sam Houston, and after basic training, I went to the Army Medical School for enlisted personnel, and there we were taught like anatomy and physiology of the human body, of all the parts and what they did, and then how they worked together and everything. But they didn't teach us nothing about curing or acting as doctors, but they taught us how to take care of the body. And after that course, they divided you and sent you to the other branches of the Army services, all the various branches of the Army. Like it has branches just like the civilian organization, and I was chosen to be in to work in a hospital. Yeah. And then there was another 6 weeks of training there. And after the training, I went overseas. I landed in the Philippines in the winter of '46, and it's kind of a odd story. The Philippines was the Philippines are not were not a state of the United States. They were a protectorate. The United States acquired Philippines because of the results of the Spanish-American War. And Spain awarded Philippines to the United States as part of the treaty. So the Americans had quite a big military installation there. They had Clark Field, and they had the cavalry base at Corregidor, and then they had the naval base at Cavite and Langapo, and then there was another base down in Mindanao. So they had about 35,000 or 40,000 people there. So the United States had a pretty good sized army there. And then I stayed in a replacement depot there, and I was transferred to Okinawa. And the funny part about it is that when we was in the Philippines, it was warm winter weather, and it was like maybe 80, 85 weather, and we wore summer clothes. And they put us on, transferred 10 of us out of there, and they put us on a seagoing tugboat that had accommodation for a crew of 3. And they put 10 of us on there, and we stayed on there for 3 days and almost 3 nights. And when we landed in Okinawa, it was like cold. They had a cold front came through there, and it was like 35 degrees, and it was kind of a misty, heavy fog and rain. And then this captain of this tugboat pulled in this dock there, and he said, "This is as far as I'm taking you folks." He said, "I called the hospital, and they're going to come pick you up." But I said, "In the meantime, I want you to stay right here on this dock. Don't go anywhere. Don't set foot above anywhere off of this dock. Don't go over there to that building or walk on that lawn over there, because there's lots of unexploded war toys there." He said, "You may end up a patient instead of a part of the hospital." So we stayed there for about an hour, and we went back to they finally come and picked us up. We come up to this hospital, and 9 Station Hospital, and this truck pulled out in front of this Quonset hut. And this was the first time I ever lived in a Quonset hut ever since I got overseas. Before, it was all tents. And the driver said, "This is going to be where you're going to stay. Go in there and find you a bed. And as long as you're here, that's where you're going to live. That's where you sleep." And it was just for sleeping. That's about all. Because the showers and the wash basins and the latrine and all that was on the outside. You had to go outside for that. But anyway, I got in there. I was getting out of my wet clothes, and there was a sergeant coming to walk in the building, and he called my name. So I answered, and he come up to me, and he asked me my name, and I told him. He said, well, change your clothes and come with me. And I was wondering, what in the world did I do? I said, I assumed that they're fixing to put me on KP. So anyway, I went, changed my clothes, and we walked up there about 100 yards to the hospital. Walked in this little room, and there was a captain nurse and a second lieutenant nurse in there, and there was 3 desks and three chairs. He opened the door and he said, "Here he is, Captain." So I was really confused and didn't know what was going on. So this captain filled me. She said there was an epidemic of sleeping sickness going on amongst natives in Okinawa, and all the military personnel and all the civilian personnel and some British personnel all had to be vaccinated. So that was my first job in the Army, vaccinating all those people. And so we vaccinated people for 3 days, 3.5 days. We went from up to, one day we did them for 14 hours. We usually went from about 10 hours a day, but the last day, which was the last day of the inoculation, we did 14 hours, and we inoculated all the military and civilian personnel on the island. And then this captain found out that I could type, and she said, well, there's going to be an opening here for somebody who can type to work here in the admittance office for this hospital. So she asked me if I'd like to do it, and I said, yeah, I'll take it, because that was a good job. I didn't have to worry about whatever the orderly did in the hospital, to make the beds and clean the messes and mop the floors or whatever. So I took that job, and I worked in there, and my job there was to, whenever they brought somebody in or somebody walked in, we had to find out who they were and where they were from and what outfit they were with and what their problem was and all their medical history and everything else. If they didn't have a service jacket with a medical record in it, we had to find out what their condition was and what their problems were, and then we had to decide where to send them in this hospital to get help, which they came after. And I worked there for about 10 months, and then I got transferred to Manila. To 10 of us did, no, 7 of us, transferred to the 609 Quartermaster Graves Registration outfit in Manila, in the Philippines. And I presume that most of the people don't know anything about Graves Registration, and I didn't either until I was part of it. But Graves Registration was a part of the United States Army from the beginning, from day one. And their job was to bury the dead at a convenient place. And they were called burial detail. And they were part of all the military campaigns of the Army that ever existed, and they still are. But like I said, they was called burial detail. But in prior to World War I, they changed the name to American Graves Registration, and they also altered the duty of them. And the job was also to bury the dead, but also to help repatriate the dead and send them to their families or bury them in a suitable cemetery. And when I got to this grave registration place, it was about 15 miles out in the country, out of Manila there, 15 miles from nowhere. It was way, way out there. Yeah. And it is a huge, huge cemetery. It's probably the biggest cemetery I have ever seen in my life. It was probably more than a half mile wide and more than a mile long. And it was called World Cemetery because anybody that died as a result of World War II, regardless of who they were, what they did, or anything else, they were buried. They had they were privileged of being buried there, and there was a lot of Americans buried there. And I was wondering, why in the world they sending military personnel to a place like this? I said, Lord, them people don't need military help anymore. But I would ask around the company clerk and some of the people that were there, and they didn't know why we was there either. They couldn't tell us why we were there. But in about a week or so, there was a civilian embalmer came up there, and he was in charge of a new organization that was going to work as a identification remain and repatriations project. And this was the first one in the Pacific. They had one in Europe, but this was the first one in the Pacific. So we were assigned to a lab where we received the remains of missing in action personnel, and we would determine who they were. Yeah. And any other remains that had questionable identification, we had to process those remains to determine who they were, to make sure that if those remains are sent home to their parents, that is part of their family, not somebody else's remains. And that was the main concern. And then people were either sent home, or they could be buried in a permanent cemetery in the island of Oahu, in the Hawaiian Islands. There's a extinct volcano, and they call it a punch bowl. And that's what the Army had a cemetery there that were people that weren't requested to be sent home were buried. And I did this for probably 2 years or more. And we processed lots of remains. And then I was sent home and discharged in 49. And I went to college and went to pharmacy school and started practicing pharmacy in 53.
Wow. So when you got in, were you an Army medic, or what was your title?
When?
In the Army, like your, I guess, job title.
Well, no, I wasn't Army medic until I went to red school.
Oh, okay.
And then they classified you or assigned you to a special branch of the Army. Well, there was maybe 10 or 15 different branches. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I was chosen to work in a hospital.
Mm-hmm. So your first job was in the hospital,
right?
And you would kind of like a doctor, just help people.
I worked in the admittance office, where the people were brought in, and we determined why they were, who they were, and why they were, and all about them, and decided where they need to go to get help.
Okay, which specific doctor to send them to, or?
No, we did that. Then we sent them to the doctors.
Okay, so would you look at injuries and evaluate?
Say that again?
Would you look at like injuries and evaluate?
Yeah, anything, for whatever reason they came, we had to find out why they were there.
I got you. And then so you did that, and then once you went to Manila, that's where you identified remains.
Right. That's how I went to grave registration.
Oh, okay. And they sent you there because you had knowledge of anatomy?
Because I had the knowledge of human anatomy. Because when you got these remains, you had to lay those remains out on a kind of some kind of slab, sort of like this. And then every station that he went to, there were 7 stations, had to do their things with those remains. And my job was to lay them out, like if they were alive, where all the bones supposed to be. Wow. And I would look for say old breaks or malformed bones or whatever, things like that, to kind of help identify them, because all of this stuff is on their Army jacket, on their medical record. And then they take all this information and they search through all these records to see if they can find those. But the most identifying thing was teeth.
Oh.
Teeth. Because you had a tooth chart in your records, and that didn't change unless they got blown away or something. But that was the most identified. But there were so many different ways that you could tell. You could, by those bones, you could tell what that person looked like, how big he was, and most everything, how old he was, how tall.
Wow. Is that what you wanted to do when you went in the Army, or that's
no?
That sounds like a tough job to look at that.
Yeah, well, that's what I was. That's what I was signed to, and you didn't have no choice. That's what you did. You went and did what they said.
And you weren't drafted. You joined because of the.
No, I wasn't drafted. I was regular Army.
So you just did 4 years and then went to college.
Right.
Was that tough to do that, or how did you just say, "This is my job. I got to do it"?
No, I just learned. He just showed us. That person that came showed us how to do it, and that's what we did. That's what we did. It wasn't nothing to learn, because everybody. This was everybody's. Every station was a person that was trained by the Army to do just that. What they were doing, like the X-ray. He did X-rays, and you had a dentist. He checked. A dental technician. He checked the teeth, and you had all of these people that checked these various stages. Or that was their specialty.
Yeah, and yours was to assemble.
Right, and find out, kind of look for what they was, any past indications of old injuries or whatever, and determine kind of how tall they were and how old they were and all that stuff like that, how big they were.
So you, just so I make sure I got the dates correct, you joined in 46?
Yes.
And then you got out in
49.
49, okay. And then what college did you go to after you got out?
University of Texas in Austin.
So you're a hookem.
Yeah.
I went to OU.
You did?
Yeah. So hopefully you don't hold that against me.
Yeah.
So you did, when you got to college, you did pharmacy?
Yes.
Okay. So what was that like? You just like pharmacy school?
Filling prescriptions for people. Done. And I worked in hospital pharmacy and retail pharmacy.
And then you did that in the Victoria area?
Yes, right.
Just multiple places?
This one, right,
And when did you retire from pharmacy?
Well, I started work. I graduated in '53, and I went to work right away, and I worked full time till '96. That's 43 years, and then I worked about 10 years off and on with Gulf Bean for another 10 years or so, and then I retired completely.
Do you have family here, or did you have wife, children, or anything like that?
My wife passed away in '99, but I have 2 sons and a daughter here.
They live in Victoria?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. You still got some family.
Right.
Family around. Do they have kids? Any grandchildren?
One of them does. I have two granddaughters.
Okay, cool.
And the other 2 are not married.
But your granddaughters, are they also here?
No.
Okay.
Right.
Let me think. So the person that nominated you was a classmate of yours.
No, she's in my exercise class.
Exercise class, yeah.
See, I go to exercise 3 times a week to Detroit Health Center, and she and I have been in that since 1999.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've been going to exercise class for over 20 years.
What's that?
You've been in that class for over 20 years.
Close to 24 years. Yeah, 1999. 3 times a week, 1 hour, hour Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, for 3 times a week, an hour of it.
So how come you do that? Just because you know health wise?
Yeah, to keep you off the couch, man. Keeps you active.
Well, you're good. You prove that if you stay active, you stay healthy.
Right.
Because you're 95?
I'll be 95 in 30 days from today.
Wow. Well, see, that's rare. Not many people in their 90s still drive or get around.
Right.
So
Yeah. You see a lot of them, 90 or less, that are hobbling along.
Yeah. So I would never guess you're in your 90s. You know?
Right.
So what do you do to stay healthy? The exercise class? Do you?
Well, I'm a master gardener. I work at the airport,
Mm-hmm.
and I work with Warriors Weekend here, and I'm a civilian police academy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm civilian police, and I do traffic and crowd control.
Traffic and crowd control, is that like at events and stuff, or what's that?
Yeah, traffic and parking on private property. We don't do it on public property, just private property.
Oh, okay. So
And then I also do like what they call, we go to parking lots and we look at a car and see if there's any reason that would entice a burglar to steal that car, like an open window or keys unlocked, or somebody might be leaving a purse in there or whatever. Anything that would be negative, we have a kind of a slip and we fill it out, put it on the windshield.
To say, hey, you need to lock this up.
And do what?
What does the slip do? Just tell them like, hey, keep this safe.
They tell them what's wrong, so they take care of it.
Mm-hmm. And that's all over in
Yeah,
Victoria.
right. Parking lots in town.
So you help keep people safe and their property safe.
Do
You help keep people's property safe.
yeah, right. Cars and stuff, right.
Well, that's really cool. And then do you have hobbies, fishing, hunting, or football teams you're interested in?
Well, I watch football because I played football in high school.
What'd you play or position?
Well, at that time, you played both ways,
Oh.
offense and defense. I played on offense. I played end. On defense, played tackle and linebacker.
And this is at Ganado High School?
Yes.
Okay. And being in the military, what did it teach you, or how did it shape you?
Well, it teach you all the fundamentals of a good life. I guess you'd put it. You know, how to do what you're told to do, or what's best for you, and respect authority, and what you learn, what's going on, you just learn life, and you put it all together real soon, and you learn what kind of people there are in the world. There's all kind.
Yeah. And how come you came back here after your service? Because you could have gone anywhere. Is this just where your family was?
Yeah, I came. Yeah, because that's where I'm from. After I got out of service, I went to Wharton Junior College. Then I got as far as I could. And then I went to UT, and then I got transferred here to Victoria from I worked in El Campo, and I got transferred here.
Okay.
And I've been here since 1955.
So you love Victoria and this area?
Yeah, right. When I came here, none of this was here. This was all pasture.
So it's grown a lot?
Oh, big time, man, big time.
So Victoria used to be pretty small?
Yeah, about 8,000, 8 to 12,000.
Wow, that is the big,
Yeah.
you know, because now we're at 60,000, I think. That's pretty
Thereabouts. And if you count all of the population from around the county, you'd get up to 100 plus, much 100 plus.
Yeah, I forget how many people are in, you know, the whole
Right,
Crossroads as a whole.
Yeah.
Do you have any pets, cats or dogs?
Pets?
Anything?
I don't, but my daughter does.
Oh, okay. You're not a pet person?
Well, I used to have dogs when I was young. I used to have hunting dogs. We used to hunt fur animals.
Well, I'm trying to think anything else. Is there anything else about military or your time in Victoria or anything I didn't ask
Well, I can tell you a story about football. When I was in the Army,
Yeah.
when I was in Okinawa, there was this place was United States Hospital was middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
There wasn't nothing 15 to 20 miles either way, and there was nothing there either. And so there was no type of recreation, no movies or nothing. You just ate and slept and did your job. But anyway, one day when I was working, there's a guy come up there and he said, I want to see you a social service person. I said, what's a social service person? He said, he's the guy that's going to tell you what to do on your time off. I said, what time off? He didn't say, but he said, come with me. So I went with him. He gave me 35 bags. And each one of those bags had a football uniform in it, complete uniform. And he had 2 bags had, there was 33 bags of uniforms and 2 bags of footballs. So man, we had all this equipment. So we organized a football team. And luckily we had one of the members that were there was a coach. He was in a high school. I mean, he got drafted. So he coached us, and we had it all going, and we play amongst each other. Then we got a game with somebody else, some other team there on the island. And we had it scheduled for like maybe Saturday morning or something. And that Thursday before that, 10 of us on that team got transferred off of that team. And that was the end of my creation. And then sent to the Philippines.
So the places you went to Philippines, to Japan, back to the Philippines?
Right, and then I went to New Guinea.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
What were you doing there?
I was sent there to recover the remains out of a B-17 that crashed in there in 1952. It crashed about 60 miles inland from Port Moresby. And what happened is, in that part of the world, that's all. That at that time was it's as pristine as pristine can get. The only thing that lived there was the natives that lived there. So you had to have a guide, and you had to have a interpreter. So we got all that lined up, and we were getting ready to go. And then the day we were supposed to go, this guide come by. He said he's not going to go there. We said, why? He said, well, he talked to a village chief about 15 miles from where we were, and he told me about, he knew about that airplane and where it was and everything I needed to know about it. But he said, don't go there because there's cannibals there. So we had to scratch that project.
So they weren't able to get the remains?
No. But I read in a paper about maybe 10 years ago where they went in and got those remains out of there. And the reason he was in a Texas paper is because one of the co-pilots was from El Paso, Texas.
Oh, wow. So they eventually got him.
Yeah.
But that's a good enough reason to scrap the project with cannibals.
Right.
Did you have any other close calls, or like that tugboat you had to go from? They put you on a tugboat from.
They had no problem.
From Philippines to Japan.
Right.
That's a long trip, I would say.
About 500 miles, probably.
And it took 3 days to.
Yeah, on tugboat. Probably about almost 3 days.
Did any children go in the military, or
No,
do you have other family
no.
that's in it? Any aunts or uncles that served?
No, they didn't want any part of it.
Yeah.
They didn't even want any part of University of Texas. They all went to A&M.
Yeah. But you're still cheering on the Longhorns.
Yes.
So you watch the Red River rivalry?
What's that?
The Red River rivalry each year? OU, Texas?
Oh, yeah, you better believe, yeah.
The showdown, or have you been to any of the games?
Yes, when I was going to school, I was.
Oh, you went to there in Dallas?
Right.
That's my favorite game of the season.
Right.
And I like to go to the fair, too. I think the Dallas, Texas State Fair is the biggest one in the country. Let's get some B-roll. I'm trying to think. Well, I think that's all the questions I had. If there's anything you wanted to add.
Well, you want me to tell you about a little story about?
Yeah. Still rolling.
This happened in the Philippines. Like I said, the Philippines there wasn't a state of the United States. It was a protectorate. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the next day the United States declared war on Germany and Japan, and they start about a month later. They start selling war bonds. You could buy a bond for $18.75, and in 5 years it was worth $25.
Wow.
And they used this money to finance the war, and also to help England with their war effort. England was having a hard time. They ran out of money, and they had to depend on the United States to keep their effort in war. But anyway, every time they had one of these bombs, which was about 2 a year, they would present a story about some individual or a group of individuals or some army unit or something about doing some kind of a heroic deed that was beneficial to the war effort. And this one time they told us about a Army Air Corps pilot. His name was Colin Kelly, that drove his B-17 into a Japanese battleship and sank it.
Wow.
So we had to adapt that. So when the Japanese invaded the Philippines, well, let me back up. The United States had about 40,000 American troops there, in the Philippines. And when the Japanese invaded the Philippines, well, some of them were evacuated, and some of them, the biggest portion of them, were captured, made prisoners of war, and sent to prison there in Cabanatuan, which was an awful hard place for the way they treated Americans. But some of them survived. And then some of them just got away, left their posts, and went up to the northeastern part of Delphines in that pristine country up there. It was wild, pristine country. There was a few people lived there, but it had no military value, so the Japanese didn't bother with it at all. So they were all safe there. They stayed there for the duration of the war. And then when the war was over, well, they started coming back to Manila and Clarkfield and all those military installations that were there that they were part of before they left. They weren't there anymore, so the Army just put them anywhere that they could, so they could keep track of them. And 3 of those people ended up in my outfit, the 609 Quartermaster Grave Registration. And one of them was a young guy. He was probably about maybe 31, 32 years old. And he was, he told me, I got to know him pretty well, and he kind of accepted me more than he accepted some of the other people, because I was regular Army and he was regular Army, and most of the other people were draftees, and he didn't cotton too much to draftees. So he kind of buddied with me, and I got to know him pretty well. But anyway, he didn't talk much about his military, hardly any. But he did tell me one time that he was a waist gunner on a B-17 stationed in Clarkfield, and he told me, gave me the name of all the personnel on there and what they did. And he said the captain was Captain Kelly, and they called him Captain Kelly. And he told me the name of the airplane, but I forgot it. So he and I were pretty close as friends, and like I say, he didn't talk much about anything, but we had some Filipino labor there, and he talked with them more than anybody. That he could talk that Tagalog, the Filipino language, and he spent more time with them. But anyway, when Memorial Day rolled around, we would put flags by the American headstones of the Americans that were buried in this big cemetery I mentioned a while ago. And one day Memorial Day, he and I were working together, and we put flags up there. And we come up to a marker that said, Captain Colin Kelly, United States Army Air Corps. And before I could even say those words, he jumped up and he said, "That's my captain, that's Captain Kelly." He said, "I've been wondering all these years what happened to Captain Kelly." He said, "Now I know what happened to Captain Kelly." I said, "Well," I said, "Looky here, from what the Army told us, your remains are supposed to be down there in the bottom in the South China Sea." So I told him what the Army had told us, that they bombed that that crashed that airplane into that Japanese ship. He said, no. He said, that's not what happened. He said, what happened that day, they was assigned alone, one bomber on that B-17 that he was on. They were sent out to bomb some Japanese ships out there on the northeast coast of Luzon. And they said there was about maybe 15, 20 men in the air. And they got attacked by a Japanese fighter plane, and they did a lot of damage to the plane. And he said the pilot radioed back and said, the plane is too damaged to continue the mission. We're going to have to go back. He said, but I'm going to go back over land, and I want everybody to bail out, and I'm going to try to get this airplane back to Clark Field. So he went back over land, everybody bailed out, and he said while he was still hanging on his parachute, maybe 200 yards away, that plane exploded over the water. And I learned from the grave registration that some of his remains floated up on the shore, and the natives buried him and kept him there until the grave registration came out, and they dug him up and buried him there in the cemetery there. And then he said, you know, after I landed, it took me 3 days to get back to Clark Field. He said when I got back, he said there was utter chaos there. He said there was nobody on the gate, there was no officers to report to, and the place where I was stationed, the section of the station, I said all the personnel gone, all the equipment was gone. I said I figured the best thing for me to do is hook them out of here. So see, I packed my bag and I took off. When I lived out in the boonies for 3 or 4 years, and he come back, and he said, you know, after I got back, I've been back for about 6 months or so. He said I checked with every source that I could to see if I could find somebody else out of that survived that crew. And he said, up to this day, I haven't found anybody. He said, it may be that I'm the only one that knows what happened to that mission that day.
Yeah.
He said, nobody has debriefed me or anything. And he said, I never told anybody else anything about it. He said, you're the first person I ever told this to. So, and he said, I just like I said, I haven't found anybody that knows anything about it. And then, about a week or two later, I was sent to New Guinea on that mission to recover that B-17. When I come back about 3 months later, 3 or 4 months later, he was gone, and they didn't know where he went or nothing.
Wow.
He might have got discharged or transferred somewhere or whatever. But I had a feeling that he had a family because he kind of talked like maybe he had a family, because he lived out there with those people for so long.
Yeah.
And you know the biggest part about this, he was like a staff sergeant, and I called him Sarge.
Yeah.
And all the time that I knew him, I never did ask him what his name was.
Oh, wow.
Never did. Never did know his name.
But you still remember him.
Yeah, I remember him.
That's pretty cool that you met him. But it's weird how people just disappear sometimes.
Right.
You don't know what happened to him, or you don't know where he's from.
I didn't know. I didn't find out. But he had been in the Philippines for maybe he talked maybe 7 or 8 years already.
Wow.
He'd been in the Army for maybe 10, 11 years, something like that, 12 years.
Well, is it alright if I get some pictures of the medals?
Yeah, sure. I can tell you what